So while Caleb's earning his extra pay, I will introduce our next speaker, is Margaret Murray, who is professor of communication. And she's going to be talking about race, class, and authenticity in Pitchfork music reviews, the reception of Vampire Weekend, and Lil Wayne.
Great, thank you. Okay, so in this project, I'm interested in how some musicians get categorized as serious artists and granted artistic license. And I became interested in this because the internet has made so much music available, it feels infinite. It can be overwhelming, and I argue that this has actually made music critics more important as agenda setters. So they may not be able to convince us what we like or what is good, but they can convince us what is important and worth talking about and paying attention to. So I decided to study one of the most popular music review sites, Pitchfork. By 2013, they were receiving 2 million visitors a month. In 2015, they were purchased by Condé Nast, the mass media international conglomerate. And they billed themselves as the most trusted voice in music. It all started in 1995 by a man named Ryan Schreiber. He was 19 years old, record store clerk living in his parents' basement. He is still the editor-in-chief. He's always been the head of Pitchfork. And he sort of brought an indie authenticity standard to Pitchfork. So when I went through their reviews, I could see this standard being applied in the reviews. Unstated criteria, but very prevalent just the same. From British cultural studies, we know that indie authenticity is concerned with the appearance of not being motivated by money, rejection of popular music, celebration of obscurity and failure, and demonstrating this through a canon of underground rock references. And this is displayed by indie musicians through their hair, their clothes, their lyrics, the instruments they use, this rejection of the popular. I decided to focus on 2 artists that Pitchfork chronicles obsessively who do not seem to initially fit this mold. The first is Vampire Weekend. They're from Brooklyn. They're on an independent label named XL, so they seem to fit the criteria at first, but they are very well dressed, and their lyrics celebrate their social class. They met at an Ivy League school. They sing about Cape Cod, Egyptian cotton, Oxford commas. And you would think this would be a problem for Pitchfork, but they say it's okay because they are actually rich. So they're not pretenders, they're not faking, they really are polite East Coasters. And here's a quote from one of their reviews. Another reason that Vampire Weekend seems to not fit the indie mold is that they use Afropunk music. So they bring in African beats into their indie songs. And they've been accused by other critics of cultural appropriation, including the New York Times. So I wanted to see how Pitchfork dealt with this. They basically argued that Vampire Weekend grew up listening to other white musicians do this, such as Paul Simon. So therefore, them doing Afropop was authentic. And because this is indie, they also brought in more obscure references like Orange Juice or the Talking Heads. So Vampire Weekend got good reviews on their first 2 albums, but their highest reviewed work was their most recent album. This got the Best New Music distinction, later went on to win a Grammy. And this album was different because they moved away from what made them famous, and they did straight ahead indie rock, emotionally direct lyrics, no Afropop. And Pitchfork lavished the praise. This was even more creative and a leap forward in emotional directness. So Vampire Weekend kind of couldn't lose. They could move across genres. They could take from different genres, and Pitchfork loved it. I wanted to contrast this with another artist who they chronicle obsessively, who doesn't seem to fit the indie standards, and that's Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne is fully enmeshed in the corporate music industry. He was signed at the age 9. He's the head of a subsidiary of Universal Records. He's won 5 Grammys, and his 2008 album was the most popular album of that year, top selling. They have reviewed 19 of his albums, including internet-only releases. Some of them they gave very high reviews, some of them very low reviews. So I wanted to rhetorically analyze what was going on in these reviews. One of the things that they emphasize whenever they talk about Lil Wayne is that he is very unique. They talk about how weird he is, how he's eccentric, and how some of his choices are very off the wall. And they emphasize that he does things because of who he is, and that he's more important to be an artist than to be popular. And that, so they like him basically in spite of his popularity, not because of it. But they limit his creative talents almost exclusively to rapping. So whenever he tries to venture outside of rapping, the reviews are much harsher and tend to be lower, more negative. So this quote, you know, he's very good at a few things, but he's not good at playing guitar, singing, selecting rappers. When he released a crossover album called Rebirth, this was his rock nu metal album, they gave a scathing review. The pullout quote actually said he was unqualified to make this rock album, which if you know the history of punk and rock music, no one is unqualified. But for Pitchfork, Lil Wayne was. They went on to say that if he wanted to move genres, that he should have followed in the steps of Andre 3000, who drew on Prince, and not draw on Effervescence. So basically stay in the black canon of music and not go into the white canon. So with limited time, why does this matter? I argue that who gets categorized as artist is very crucial for who gets to have a long career, who gets to cross genres, stay in the public realm, be creative. We also can see how cultural appropriation is rhetorically legitimized in the case of Vampire Weekend. And basically, who gets to be the weirdo who has a long career and who's dismissed. All right, thank you.